Stanley Meyer's water-powered car. They say the most dangerous ideas are not the ones shouted in the streets, but the ones whispered in garages. In the quiet town of Grove City, Ohio, during the late 1980s, a man named Stanley Meyer spent his days in a small workshop behind his house. It didn't look like the birthplace of a revolution. The walls were lined with common tools. The floor was scattered with wires, tubes, diagrams. At the center of it all sat a homemade dune buggy, unremarkable until you looked closer. There were no fuel tanks, no complex wiring typical of electric vehicles. What powered it, Stanley claimed, was something far more extraordinary, something freely available in every home, in every stream, in every raindrop: water. Meyer believed he had created something that could render fossil fuels obsolete. He wasn't selling a dream. He said he had built it, a functioning car that ran entirely on water. He called it the water fuel cell. With this device, he claimed, he could split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen using a process so efficient that the hydrogen could then be used to fuel a regular combustion engine. The car would emit only water vapor, no gasoline, no pollution, no dependence on oil. It wasn't a fantasy to him. It was real. He filed patents, conducted demonstrations, and showed his vehicle to reporters and potential investors. He didn't stumble over his words. He wasn't evasive. He spoke with the calm confidence of a man who had seen the future. In one interview, he stated clearly, "It works." He even claimed his car could travel across the entire United States on just over 20 gallons of water. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptics pointed out that his theories violated known laws of thermodynamics. Traditional electrolysis, the process of splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, consumes more energy than it produces. Meyer's device, he said, bypassed this problem using high-frequency voltage to achieve what he called resonant electrolysis. He described water molecules shaking apart under a precise electrical vibration. It sounded like science fiction, and yet the car moved. The world should have changed that day, but it didn't. The demonstrations were forgotten by the mainstream press. Scientists dismissed his claims. The energy industry didn't respond at all. But in the background, in whispers, the idea began to grow. Not just that Meyer had done something incredible, but that he had done something dangerous. Because if it worked, if a man in his garage had created a way to power cars with nothing but water, the implications were seismic. The energy sector, built on trillions in oil and gas infrastructure, would be thrown into chaos. Governments would lose one of their most powerful tools: control over energy distribution. Corporations whose profits depended on scarcity would see the ground vanish beneath their feet. A world powered by water is a world no longer bound by markets, pipelines, or politics. That kind of freedom, many believe, could never be allowed. In 1996, Meyer was taken to court by investors who accused him of fraud. The judge ruled against him, stating that he had misrepresented his invention. But to some, that trial wasn't justice. It was a quiet execution, not of a man, but of a possibility. Meyer insisted the court didn't understand his technology. He maintained it was real. He kept working. Then 2 years later, in March of 1998, Stanley Meyer went to a restaurant with his brother and 2 Belgian investors. They were discussing plans for future development. According to his brother, after taking a sip of cranberry juice, Stanley stood up abruptly, clutching his throat, stumbled into the parking lot, and collapsed. His last words, according to eyewitnesses, were chilling. "They poisoned me." He died minutes later. The official cause was a cerebral aneurysm. The case was closed. There was no investigation into foul play. What followed was silence. The car disappeared. His lab was emptied. His patents fell into obscurity. His notes were scattered. And just like that, the man who claimed to have unlocked clean energy from water was gone, along with every trace of his invention. Some say it was a hoax, a delusion that went too far. But others aren't so sure. They point to the perfect timing of his death, the disappearance of his work, the sudden end to everything just as momentum was building. To them, it doesn't look like failure. It looks like erasure. Today, if you search for Stanley Meyer, you'll find fragments, faded newspaper clippings, grainy video footage of his car driving down a quiet road, diagrams drawn by hand, and stories. Stories of a man who believed he had touched something forbidden, something that would threaten every system built on control and consumption, a man who thought he could offer the world freedom and paid for it with silence. In the years since, countless inventors have tried to replicate what he did. Some claim success, most do not. But still, the idea lingers that perhaps somewhere in that garage, in that dune buggy powered by tap water, was a glimpse of what the world could have been. Not ruled by scarcity, but nourished by abundance. Not poisoned by smoke, but cleansed by vapor. Not addicted to combustion, but awakened by resonance. And if that is true, then what happened to Stanley Meyer was not just the death of a man, but the burial of a future. As the world continues to spin on oil and the air grows heavier with each passing year, we return to his story again and again, like a forgotten melody half remembered in the dark. Not because we are sure it was real, but because we are terrified it might have been. And so in the quiet just before sleep, we ask ourselves, what if he was right? Nikola Tesla's wireless energy tower. In the hush of a forgotten field in Shoreham, Long Island, a great tower once pierced the sky. It stood alone, vast, alien, almost mythic in its proportions. The Wardenclyffe Tower, they called it. But to its creator, the visionary inventor Nikola Tesla, it was something more than a structure. It was a beacon to the future, a transmitter of power, a promise. For decades, the story has been passed down like a strange secret hidden in plain sight. That Tesla, the brilliant, eccentric genius of the electrical age, had built a device capable of sending limitless energy wirelessly through the air. Not electricity and cables, not batteries or engines, but energy, ambient, free and universal, drawn from the very earth itself and shared without wires, without limitations, without cost. Tesla was not a dreamer in the ordinary sense. His ideas were not fanciful hopes. They were blueprints, meticulously drawn, mathematically sound, and decades ahead of their time. He imagined a world where towers like Wardenclyffe would stand across continents, forming a grid not just for communication, but for power. Endless, pulsing energy broadcast through the atmosphere. A house in the countryside, a ship at sea, even an aircraft in flight could, in theory, receive power directly through the air. No fuel required, no wires needed, nothing but the vast forces of nature, tamed and harmonized. The tower itself was a marvel, nearly 200 feet tall, crowned with a bulbous dome of copper and steel. Beneath the ground stretched a deep network of iron rods, designed to resonate with the Earth's natural frequencies. Tesla believed the planet itself could act as a conductor, vibrating like a bell, transmitting energy across any distance. The vision was breathtaking. It would eliminate the need for coal plants, for oil rigs, for wars fought over pipelines and power lines. Energy would become as free as air, invisible, infinite, and accessible to all. But not everyone saw a miracle. Some saw a threat. At first, Tesla had the backing of J.P. Morgan, one of the most powerful financiers of the age. Morgan agreed to fund the tower under the impression it would be used to transmit telegraphic signals, a project already proven by Tesla's earlier work in radio. But when Tesla revealed the deeper purpose, that he intended not just communication, but the transmission of power itself, the support evaporated. Morgan famously asked, "Where do we put the meter?" It was not a question of feasibility, but of profit. Free energy, after all, cannot be owned. It cannot be controlled. And in a world built on scarcity, abundance is the most dangerous idea of all. Funding dried up. The press turned against him. The tower, incomplete and abandoned, stood as a monument to ambition unfulfilled. And Tesla, once hailed as a genius, faded into the margins of society, discredited, ridiculed, and slowly forgotten. But was it really impossible, or simply inconvenient? Many who have studied Tesla's work believe he was on the verge of something extraordinary. His notes, some of which remain classified or scattered in private collections, reveal a mind operating far beyond the scientific conventions of his time. He spoke of standing waves in the earth, of resonance, of drawing energy directly from the ionosphere. Even today, aspects of his theories are being re-examined through the lens of modern physics. Was he wrong, or simply too far ahead? What makes the Wardenclyffe Tower so haunting is not that it failed, but that it was never allowed to succeed. The structure was later dismantled and sold for scrap during World War I. Tesla himself died alone in a New York hotel room, penniless and largely ignored. His belongings were seized by the U.S. government, some under the guise of national security, and the world, unaware of what it might have lost, moved on, powered by oil, driven by wires, bound by the very limitations Tesla had hoped to eliminate. But the memory lingers. Sometimes in the faint hum of electrical lines, in the pulse of radio waves, in the silent language of wireless networks that now span the globe, we can still feel the echo of his dream. He imagined a world where energy would flow like music through the air, touching every life, lifting every burden. Not for profit, not for power, but for progress. It was a vision too pure, perhaps, for a world not yet ready to be free. Today we live in a time where wireless communication is taken for granted. Signals passing through our bodies, through walls, through oceans. Satellites beam information across continents in seconds. And yet, we are still tethered to wires, to grids, to centralized control. Tesla's dream remains unrealized, not because it was impossible, but because the world chose not to see it. The question now, as it was then, is not whether such technology can exist, but whether those who profit from control will ever allow it to be used. Wardenclyffe stands no more. Its steel bones have long since vanished, but in the minds of those who still believe, the tower lives on, not as a relic, but as a symbol, a monument to the path not taken, a glimpse into a world powered not by oil or coal or scarcity, but by the raw, endless heartbeat of the planet itself. And so, in the silence between thoughts, in the invisible waves that surround us, we wonder, what if we had followed that path? What if the sky had been our grid? What if Tesla, strange and brilliant and alone, had been allowed to finish what he started? Sleep now, but remember, some inventions are not destroyed, they are buried. And sometimes the Earth itself still hums with their potential. John Keely's Etheric generator. In the smoky dawn of the industrial age, when steam and coal ruled the rhythm of cities and the heartbeat of empires, a man in Philadelphia claimed to have uncovered something older than fire, something more elemental than electricity. His name was John Ernst Worrell Keely, and the invention he claimed to possess did not hum or churn like the great engines of the era. It resonated, it sang, it vibrated with an invisible force he called the ether. To understand Keely is to step into a different kind of history, one where science brushes against mysticism, and the line between genius and charlatan becomes too thin to see. He wasn't a scientist in the academic sense. He wore no white coat, attended no respected university, and yet in the 1870s, newspapers across America began whispering about him, about his machine, about the way it seemed to defy every known law. Keely claimed that all matter, from the heaviest metal to the lightest breath, vibrated at specific frequencies, and within those frequencies lay a hidden force, a kind of primordial energy that connected everything. He called this energy the etheric force, an invisible medium that filled all space, sound, light, magnetism, gravity. To Keely, they were simply different expressions of this one unified field, and he insisted, found a way to tap into it. His machine, sometimes called the Etheric generator, sometimes the Keely motor, was a bewildering collection of polished brass tubes, tuned resonators, and crystalline chambers. It didn't run on steam, or coal, or electricity. It had no fuel source at all in the traditional sense. Instead, Keely said, it worked by sympathetic vibration. By playing precise musical notes into his device, he claimed he could initiate powerful mechanical reactions, tapping into the fundamental resonances of nature itself. A kind of musical alchemy where sound became force. He demonstrated the machine to astonished audiences. In some displays, he poured a small vial of water into the engine, plucked a string, and suddenly, with no visible power source, massive steel balls spun, Pistons fired, and flywheels howled to life. Observers swore that the machine levitated, that it shattered stone, that it moved without any observable input of energy. Investors lined up. Journalists scribbled. Some believed Keely had uncovered a force that would replace steam entirely. Something infinite, something divine. But with each year that passed, doubt began to settle in the air like smoke. Keely was evasive. He refused to share the inner workings of his invention. He delayed the release of his technology year after year, claiming he was refining, improving, evolving. But the improvements never seemed to end. Scientists demanded proof. He refused to give them full access. They accused him of fraud. He accused them of blindness. His lab became a place of secrecy and speculation. No one could deny that something unusual was happening in those demonstrations, but no one could replicate them either. When the courts finally forced Keely to reveal his machine for inspection, the results were strange. Inside the foundation of his lab, investigators found hidden tubes and pressurized chambers. Some said they were part of a secret pneumatic system, a way to simulate power with compressed air. Others insisted it was a misunderstanding, that Keely's machines were more delicate than anyone realized, and that the tubes were simply structural or acoustic in nature. He died in 1898, taking the full knowledge of his work with him. The lab was dismantled. His notes, written in arcane symbolism and poetic metaphors, were nearly indecipherable. His machines, now silent, were put into storage and forgotten. The scientific community moved on. His name faded into obscurity. And yet, a century later, whispers of Keely's engine still circulate. Engineers and fringe researchers revisit his ideas, wondering if perhaps he had glimpsed something real, an undiscovered principle that couldn't be explained with the science of his time. Quantum physicists now speak of fields and frequencies with language not so different from Keely's own. The idea that vibration underlies all matter is no longer dismissed. It's foundational. What he called ether, we now call the vacuum field, the zero-point energy, the quantum foam. The universe at its most intimate level still trembles. So the question lingers, what if Keely was right, just too early? What if buried beneath the eccentricity in the theatrical displays, there really was a mechanism that could harmonize with the structure of the cosmos and draw energy not from fuel, but from the resonant song of the universe? It would be hard to believe, except for the fact that Keely wasn't alone. Across history, from ancient myths of sound-moving stones to the harmonic experiments of later inventors, there have been echoes of the same idea, that sound, frequency, and vibration might do more than just stir the air. They might move the world. We may never know what Keely truly discovered, whether his machines were elaborate illusions or the first glimmers of a new science. But in the hush between waking and sleep, when the world feels like it's humming just beyond perception, we might still hear it, a low, unending tone beneath everything. A tone that once shook the brass bones of a forgotten machine, a tone that still waits for someone to listen again. Edwin Gray's free energy motor. Sometimes the most remarkable moments in history begin not with an explosion, but with a quiet hum. In the early 1970s, in a modest garage tucked away in Van Nuys, California, an inventor named Edwin Vincent Gray unveiled a device that, according to his own demonstrations, could produce vast amounts of usable electricity, more than it consumed. It didn't burn fuel. It didn't rely on solar panels or wind turbines. It ran, as he described it, on the very structure of electricity itself. He called it the EMA motor, short for Electromagnetic Association motor. But those who saw it in action referred to it more simply, the free energy machine. Gray was no backyard tinkerer. He was a veteran of the U.S. military, a trained electrical engineer, and a man who spoke about his invention with absolute clarity. He claimed that his system was not creating energy out of nothing, but rather tapping into a rarely understood aspect of the electrical process. Mainstream science insisted that every watt of power must come from somewhere, from a battery, a generator, a combustion reaction. But Gray suggested something else entirely, that conventional circuits wasted most of their potential, and that he had found a way to split electricity into two forms, one that powered devices and another that could be recycled endlessly with virtually no loss. He demonstrated the motor to engineers, investors, and curious onlookers. In one famous test, he connected the system to an array of incandescent light bulbs. They glowed brightly. Then more bulbs were added, still glowing. The energy source didn't falter. According to witnesses, the motor ran cool, made little noise, and consumed far less energy than it delivered. The implications were enormous. Gray claimed that his engine could drive a car, power a home, or run an entire factory, without fossil fuels, without noise, without pollution. He had filed over 80 patents and had begun forming a company to manufacture and distribute his discovery. He gave interviews in which he spoke plainly about the future. He envisioned neighborhoods with energy independence, vehicles that never needed fuel, entire cities running on self-sustaining systems. His vision wasn't utopian. It was mechanical, electrical, precise. And to those who saw it, it looked very real. But then something changed. Without warning, Gray's laboratory was raided, not by competitors, but by government agents. The reason was vague: violations of regulatory standards, unauthorized use of electrical equipment. But what they took was clear: his prototypes, his notes, his parts, his machines. Everything that made the EMA motor what it was, gone. The seizure sent a chill through the small circle of alternative energy researchers who had begun to believe that a new era of power was dawning. The message was unmistakable. Some inventions are not welcome. Gray was never quite the same after the raid. He tried to rebuild, to refile patents, to continue development, but something had shifted. Investors withdrew. Lawsuits appeared. The media, once mildly curious, turned skeptical. Where there had been excitement, now there was suspicion. He became more reclusive, more guarded, unwilling to share details. And then, like a light quietly flickering out, his name faded from headlines. He died in 1989 under mysterious circumstances. The cause of death was officially heart failure. But to this day, whispers persist that he was silenced. Not by heart, but by hand. That he had, perhaps unknowingly, crossed an invisible line. One that separates conventional innovation from forbidden discovery. What's left of Gray's work is fragmented. A few surviving patents, some photographs, a grainy video or two. Copies of technical schematics passed around in obscure forms, photocopied to near illegibility. And stories. Stories from those who stood in his lab and watched the motor spin, watched the lights glow without heat, watched the impossible unfold in absolute silence. Critics say it was all a misunderstanding, that Gray was mistaken about his results, or worse, that he deliberately deceived his audience. They point to the lack of peer-reviewed data, the absence of replication, the strange secrecy surrounding his circuits. But others see something else, a pattern. Again and again, inventors who claim to discover new ways of producing energy, ways that challenge the financial and industrial structure of the world, seem to meet the same fate. First ignored, then ridiculed, then investigated, then erased. Whether it's coincidence, incompetence, or something far more deliberate, the outcome is always the same. The invention disappears. Perhaps Gray's motor never worked. Perhaps it was an illusion of wires and voltmeters, a misreading of current, a dream built on sparks and hope. Or perhaps in a forgotten garage under a humming fluorescent light, Edwin Gray tapped into something real. Something dangerous, not because it failed, but because it didn't. Imagine a world where energy is free, where every home can power itself indefinitely, where the engines of the earth no longer drink oil or belch smoke. It is a world that threatens industries, economies, governments, everything that rests on the scarcity of energy. And it is a world that Edwin Gray may have glimpsed, however briefly, before the door was closed. As you drift further into thought, picture the dim light of a workbench, a man soldering a final connection, the soft hum of magnets spinning without resistance, a motor that shouldn't work, yet does. And then the silence that follows. Not because the machine failed, but because it was no longer allowed to be heard. Some motors burn out, some are shut down, and some simply vanish. But somewhere in a dusty garage or in the margins of forgotten patent files, the blueprints still wait. quietly, patiently, for someone to build them again. Royal Rife's frequency beam device. There are stories that sound too good to be true, and then there are stories that feel too terrifying to be ignored. The tale of Royal Raymond Rife lies somewhere in between, suspended in that uneasy space where hope, science, and silence collide. In the early decades of the 20th century, Rife was not a fringe character. He was a meticulous inventor, a microscopist of legendary patience and skill. Born in 1888, Rife dedicated his life not to chasing profit or acclaim, but to solving one of humanity's oldest enemies: disease. He didn't speak in the language of pharmaceuticals or surgical intervention. Instead, he spoke of frequencies, of vibration, of resonance. He believed that every living organism had a unique electromagnetic signature, a frequency that defined its structure, its rhythm, its life. And if that were true, then it followed that a destructive resonance, carefully tuned, could shatter harmful organisms without damaging the tissue around them. By the 1930s, Rife had built a microscope unlike any other in the world. His universal microscope, as he called it, allowed him to see living viruses, something mainstream science wouldn't accomplish for decades using electron microscopes that destroyed their subjects. Rife's microscope used polarized light, prisms, and a strange harmonic principle that he never fully disclosed. With it, he observed viruses altering shape, adapting, hiding inside bacteria, and he watched what happened when he applied precise electromagnetic frequencies to them. They shattered, not with heat, not with chemicals, but with a subtle, invisible force, a kind of musical death. He called these harmonic attacks mortal oscillatory rates. To Rife, diseases were not mysterious curses. They were patterns, and patterns could be undone. It was around this core idea that he built the Rife beam ray, a frequency generator that he claimed could destroy cancer cells, tuberculosis, even viruses, without harming the surrounding body. In 1934, a clinical trial was allegedly held in California under the supervision of several doctors. Rife claimed that 14 out of 16 terminal cancer patients were cured within 90 days. The remaining 2, he said, were cured shortly after. If that were true, the implications would be beyond revolutionary. It would mean the end of chemotherapy, radiation, invasive surgery. It would mean that diseases long feared as death sentences could be undone by light and sound. But the story doesn't continue with celebration. Soon after his results began to circulate, something began to shift. Rife's lab was mysteriously burglarized, equipment destroyed, documents vanished. Doctors who had supported his work were pressured to recant. Some lost their medical licenses, others withdrew silently. Lawsuits followed, partnerships dissolved. The promising momentum surrounding Rife's machine slowed, then stalled, then collapsed entirely. The American Medical Association, under the leadership of Dr. Morris Fishbein, refused to endorse Rife's technology. Instead, they launched a campaign of discreditation, labeling his work as unscientific and dangerous. Fishbein, whose connections to pharmaceutical interests were well known, dismissed Rife's findings without public demonstration or direct review. The press followed suit. The narrative shifted. Rife wasn't a visionary, he was a quack. In 1939, Rife's primary supporter, engineer Philip Hoyland, was taken to court. Legal battles ensued for years, draining resources, dividing allies. By the 1940s, the Rife beam ray was all but extinct, outlawed, ridiculed, erased from clinical consideration. Rife himself fell into depression. He continued to tinker, to refine, but the momentum had been broken. His health deteriorated. He died in 1971, largely forgotten, and yet his device was never truly gone. Scattered around the world, small groups of researchers held onto blueprints, notes, and memories. They rebuilt what they could. In basements, barns, and backroom labs, machines began to reappear. Crude reconstructions of the beam ray, aimed not at profit but at rediscovery. Testimonials emerged, people claiming miraculous recoveries from ailments after exposure to Rife-like frequencies. But without regulatory approval or scientific acceptance, these stories remained in the shadows, dismissed as anecdotes, not evidence. Today, frequency therapy exists on the outer edge of alternative medicine. Some call it pseudoscience. Others swear by it. Modern physics has confirmed that all matter vibrates, that resonance is real, and that frequencies can indeed affect biological processes. But the bridge between these truths and the claim of a universal cure remains buried in history. What if Rife had been allowed to continue? What if instead of silence there had been support? What if beneath the bureaucratic resistance and economic interests, there was a man who had indeed found a way to heal not by cutting, burning, or poisoning, but by listening, by tuning into the song of life and gently changing the notes? It is difficult to know where the line lies, between belief and illusion, between genius and delusion. But Rife's story leaves behind a peculiar kind of ache. Not the ache of what was, but of what might have been. A machine that sang diseases to death. A microscope that saw the invisible. A man who believed that answers weren't hidden in chemicals, but in harmonics. As you drift deeper into stillness, consider the possibility that truth sometimes arrives before the world is ready to hear it. That some answers come not with thunder, but with frequency. And that perhaps, somewhere, a soft vibration still echoes through time, waiting to be heard again. Not all cures come with a pill. Some arrive as a whisper, and then, like a melody, they vanish. Wilhelm Reich's Orgone accumulator. There are few figures in the history of science as polarizing, as defiant, or as utterly exiled from the mainstream as Wilhelm Reich. Once a rising star in the world of psychoanalysis, a protege of Sigmund Freud, Reich did not walk away from conventional science. He was pushed, slowly, then violently, until his name was no longer spoken in academic halls, but whispered in the corners of fringe literature. And at the center of his exile was a strange idea, in a box. He called it the Orgone accumulator, a device that, according to Reich, could collect and store a type of energy that permeated all of existence. Not electricity, not magnetism, something deeper, something older, something alive. Reich's journey to that discovery was not linear. He began his career exploring the emotional and sexual forces that shaped the human psyche. But he soon became convinced that these forces weren't just metaphors. They were physical, tangible, observable in the body and, more crucially, in the surrounding space. He believed that the human body both emitted and absorbed this energy, a vital, glowing field that pulsed through everything. It was not just biological, it was cosmological. He called it orgone. Orgone, according to Reich, was the life force, a universal primal energy responsible for weather patterns, plant growth, human health, even the very motion of the galaxies. It was, he said, the breath of the cosmos, invisible, but not imaginary, and with the right materials it could be gathered, concentrated, and directed. The Orgone accumulator was startlingly simple, a human-sized box built of alternating layers of organic and metallic materials, wood, steel wool, cotton, sheet metal, designed to attract and trap orgone in a confined space. The person would sit inside. No wires, no plugs, no moving parts. Just a silence filled with potential. Patients who used it reported extraordinary effects: warmth, tingling, a sense of vitality, emotional release, even remission of physical illness. Reich conducted experiments with plants, animals, even cancer mice, claiming that exposure to concentrated organ energy accelerated healing, increased cell regeneration, and altered weather patterns. He published his findings, filmed his experiments, documented his procedures with scientific rigor, or at least with what he believed to be such. But the world outside his laboratory wasn't impressed. It was frightened. In the 1950s, the United States government began to take an active interest in Reich's work, not with curiosity, but with concern. The Food and Drug Administration declared that organ energy did not exist, that his devices were fraudulent, that his claims were dangerous. Reich refused to cease his work. He insisted he was not selling miracle cures, only pursuing science. But it didn't matter. In 1954, the U.S. District Court issued an injunction ordering Reich to stop distributing his accumulators and any literature promoting them. Reich refused to appear in court. He said a court of law had no jurisdiction over scientific truth, and so the government escalated. In a stunning and nearly unprecedented act, federal agents burned his books, destroyed his research papers, confiscated his machines, and supervised the incineration of his scientific materials in public dumps. Entire shipments of his publications were ripped from circulation and pulped. To those who watched from the sidelines, it wasn't just a legal dispute, it was a purge. In 1956, Reich was arrested for violating the injunction. He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. He died there in his cell of heart failure, alone, forgotten by most, vilified by others. And yet, he left behind something more enduring than his reputation, the memory of an idea that refused to disappear. Today, the concept of Orgone is still dismissed by mainstream science, but it survives on the fringes. Practitioners, experimenters, and quiet believers still build accumulators, still meditate inside them, still swear by their effects. Modern physics, with its talk of zero-point energy and quantum vacuum fluctuations, sounds eerily similar to what Reich described. A background sea of potential, everywhere and nowhere. Is it the same thing? Probably not, but the echo is undeniable. Reich saw the universe not as dead matter in motion, but as a living field of energy and sensation. To him, storms weren't just collisions of air pressure, but eruptions of emotional charge. Illness was not just chemical imbalance, but a disturbance in the flow of life itself. His language was strange, poetic, defiant, but underneath it lay a conviction that still resonates, that something vital moves through all things, unseen but not unfelt, and that to block it, to ignore it, is to grow sick, silent, numb. Perhaps that is why his work was so feared, not because it was nonsense, but because it demanded we see the world differently, not as a machine, but as a body, a breathing, pulsing, energetic whole. As you fall deeper into quiet, imagine sitting inside that strange box, the world muffled outside, the air thick with stillness. You feel nothing at first, then a sensation, difficult to name, not heat, not sound, not vibration, just presence, as if the air itself is watching you, holding you, feeding something forgotten inside. Was Reich mad or merely early? Was the energy he described real, or was he just too poetic for the sterile language of science? We may never know, but the fire that burned his books could not burn the question he left behind. What if the universe is alive? And what if it's trying to speak? Some energies are not meant to be measured. Some truths are too bright to survive, but still they pulse, silently, stubbornly, just beneath the surface, waiting to be felt again. Thomas Townsend Brown's Electrogravitics engine. There are few ideas more intoxicating than the dream of defying gravity, of lifting ourselves beyond the weight of the earth, not with the roar of fuel and flame, but with silent, effortless motion. For most, this vision belongs to science fiction, but for Thomas Townsend Brown, it was an experiment, a device, a reality that shimmered just beyond the limits of conventional science. Brown was born in 1905, a time when gravity was still seen as a static force, unchangeable, absolute. But as a young man fascinated by both the electricity and space, he began asking strange questions. What if gravity wasn't just a pull from the Earth? What if, like magnetism, it could be shaped, redirected, maybe even canceled? These weren't the questions his professors encouraged, but Brown didn't stop to ask permission. He went straight to the lab. While experimenting with high-voltage capacitors, Brown noticed something peculiar. When he charged a specially arranged set of plates, one small, one large, and suspended them in an insulating medium, the system moved. Not in a chaotic way. It drifted in a specific direction against all expectation. It was small at first, barely perceptible, but repeatable, testable, and haunting. He called the phenomenon the Biefeld-Brown effect, named in part after his mentor at Denison University. But what he really believed he had discovered was something far greater: electrogravitics, the idea that gravity itself could be manipulated by electrical means. Brown envisioned a world where this principle could be applied at scale, aircraft that hovered silently, spacecraft that rose gently from the Earth without exhaust or flame, transportation systems that levitated, energy systems that required no combustion. His diagrams showed saucer-like designs, curved electrodes, thin disks charged with high-voltage fields. He wasn't guessing. He was building. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, he pursued his experiments quietly, submitting patents, forming research companies, reaching out to the military and aerospace industries. Some listened. Many didn't understand. But the real shift came after World War II, when the Cold War ushered in an era of unprecedented technological secrecy. Suddenly, anti-gravity wasn't just an eccentric idea. It was a potential weapon, a strategic advantage. Brown began working with defense contractors. He submitted his findings to military agencies. His work entered the fog of classified research. And then, like so many before and after him, he seemed to vanish from the public eye. But not entirely. In the 1950s, rumors began to swirl that the U.S. military was conducting tests with electrogravitic propulsion systems, that experimental aircraft had been built based on Brown's designs, that his saucer-like lifters had inspired not just awe, but fear. Some even speculated that this was the source of the growing wave of UFO sightings, not visitors from another planet, but secret machines born of forgotten American labs. Brown never confirmed these rumors. He continued to work, publish, and file patents, but he became increasingly marginalized. Academia dismissed him. Aerospace giants quietly closed their doors. By the 1970s, electrogravitics had become a word not spoken in respectable engineering circles. Fringe, pseudoscience, a curiosity for basement tinkerers and conspiracy theorists. And yet, behind that public dismissal, the silence grew louder. Declassified documents would later reveal that Brown's work had indeed been studied by the military, that test flights had occurred, that his theories, though never formally adopted, had never been entirely discarded. They were shelved quietly in the shadows of black-budget projects, far from public scrutiny. So what happened? Some say the technology didn't scale, that while Brown's lifters could move under high voltage, they didn't produce enough thrust to be useful. Others suggest a more unsettling possibility, that it worked too well, and that its implications for propulsion, power, and even weapons were too disruptive to reveal. After all, a world where gravity can be neutralized is a world where the rules change. Aircraft become obsolete, fuel economies collapse, space is no longer distant. Power structures, political, industrial, economic, are rewritten. Brown died in 1985, having spent nearly 6 decades chasing an invisible force. He never saw his dream realized, but the echoes of his work remain. Enthusiasts and independent researchers still build lifter devices in their garages, watching as small foil structures rise into the air with no moving parts, powered only by high-voltage fields. Some say it's just ion wind, an effect where charged particles push air molecules and create thrust. Others believe it's something more, a hint of gravity bending in ways we don't yet understand. Modern physics has begun to flirt with similar ideas. Theories of space-time manipulation, quantum fields, exotic propulsion, all dance on the edge of Brown's early work. Once again, the lines between science and science fiction blur. Once again, someone is asking, what if? As you drift deeper into stillness, imagine a craft, smooth and silent, hovering in the night sky. No wings, no flame, just a subtle hum, like the breath of a new world. Maybe it was a dream, or maybe it was real. A forgotten invention, hidden not because it failed, but because it worked. Some machines lift with noise, others lift with light, and some perhaps lift with nothing at all. Only silence, and the slow, steady undoing of gravity itself. Hendershot's magnetic generator. It began, as many of these stories do, with a spark, not of combustion, but of curiosity. In the late 1920s, deep in the folds of rural Pennsylvania, a self-taught inventor named Lester J. Hendershot quietly built something that should not have worked. He wasn't a physicist, nor did he wear the robe of academia, but he had an instinct for energy, for motion, for the unseen currents that pulse through space even when everything appears still. and he claimed to have created a device that could tap into those currents, a generator that ran without fuel, without wires, without heat. A machine powered, he said, by the Earth's own magnetic field. The story first surfaced with a whisper, then a headline. Hendershot, working with no formal backing and little money, had created what he called a fuelless motor. It didn't rely on gasoline, coal, or electricity from an outlet. Instead, it used coils, magnets, and capacitors arranged in a very specific pattern, like a tuning fork designed not for sound, but for the very breath of the Earth. He claimed the energy was everywhere, like invisible rivers of force flowing through the ground and air, waiting to be harnessed. He had simply found the right key to tap into it. The machine itself was small, no larger than a suitcase, a tangle of wires and loops, odd angles and hand-built parts. When it was demonstrated to the press, it lit bulbs, powered motors, and hummed softly, all without any external source of power. No hidden cords, no batteries. Witnesses reported what looked like a quiet miracle. Among those watching was Charles Lindbergh, the aviator and national hero, who became intrigued by the possibility of a plane that never needed refueling. If Hendershot's invention worked, the skies themselves would be transformed. For a moment, the world held its breath. But then, as with so many stories like this, the breath was stolen. Almost overnight, the demonstration stopped. Hendershot vanished from the press. There were rumors that he had been threatened. Others said he had been silenced by powerful energy interests, who saw in his work not a wonder, but a threat. After all, a generator that pulls power from the planet without burning anything, without consuming fuel, without creating profit, what would that mean for the world's tightly gripped systems of energy distribution? For oil, for coal, for gas, for control? Still, Hendershot did not completely disappear. In the years that followed, he attempted to revive the invention. He relocated to Detroit, then Pittsburgh, trying to gain traction with various backers. But wherever he turned, the same pattern emerged. Promising beginnings, sudden endings, meetings that went nowhere, machines that vanished, friends who distanced themselves. Even his own prototypes seemed to be taken from him, seized, dismantled, or simply lost. And then, in 1961, the story ended as suddenly as it had begun. Hendershot was found dead in his workshop. The official cause was ruled a suicide. He had apparently electrocuted himself. But those close to him questioned the circumstances. Why would a man who had dedicated his life to building a better world, a man reportedly on the cusp of revealing his greatest breakthrough, suddenly choose silence? And why, once again, was the machine nowhere to be found? What remains today are fragments, scattered notes, blurry photographs, hand-drawn schematics copied and recopied over decades by enthusiasts and believers. Replicas have been built. Some say they work, others say they fail. But the legend persists not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. Because the story of Lester Hendershot fits into a pattern seen again and again. An inventor glimpses something astonishing, builds something impossible, and then vanishes into the folds of history. Skeptics insist there is nothing here, that the laws of thermodynamics hold firm, that energy must come from somewhere, that perpetual motion is a fantasy. But what if the laws we cling to are only approximations, shadows on the wall of a deeper cave? What if Hendershot's machine didn't violate the rules, but revealed ones we haven't yet learned? Modern science now explores zero-point energy, magnetic resonance, and field effects once thought impossible. The idea that the vacuum of space is not empty, but boiling with potential, is no longer science fiction. Hendershot may have spoken in the language of magnets and coils, but the essence of his work speaks to something more fundamental. The notion that the universe itself might be a battery, humming quietly all around us. As your thoughts soften into stillness, picture the small device on a workbench. No smoke, no flame, just a faint magnetic pulse, like a heartbeat, rhythmic and eternal. It doesn't roar to life, it awakens slowly, like something that was always there, something forgotten, something forbidden. A motor that does not burn, a generator that does not consume, A whisper of the earth, captured in copper and steel. Perhaps it failed. Perhaps it never worked. Or perhaps, just perhaps, we chose not to hear what it had to say. Nikola Tesla's death ray. By the time Nikola Tesla reached the twilight years of his life, the world had largely turned its back on him. Once hailed as a scientific prodigy, a man who electrified the world with alternating current and who dreamed of wireless energy lighting up entire continents, Tesla had become a solitary figure, pacing alone through New York hotel rooms, feeding pigeons in Central Park, scribbling equations in notebooks no one would ever see. But Tesla hadn't stopped inventing. Far from it. Even as the world moved on, his mind roamed freely through the fabric of time and space, and among his final, most controversial ideas was a machine he claimed could end all war, not through diplomacy, but through absolute deterrence. A weapon unlike any the world had ever seen. He called it the Teleforce, but the press, captivated by the drama of it, gave it a more ominous name: Tesla's death ray. The concept was deceptively simple, at least in Tesla's own words. It would not be a beam of light or fire, nor a cannon that launched physical projectiles. Instead, Tesla claimed he had discovered a method to accelerate particles, tiny, subatomic pellets of metal, to near-light speeds using a system of high-voltage electrostatic repulsion. These particles, when directed in a focused stream, could travel hundreds of miles through the air, invisible and unstoppable, destroying anything in their path, tanks, planes, even entire armies, without leaving a trace. Unlike conventional weapons, Tesla's design wasn't explosive. It was surgical, clean, silent. The beam would not scatter or decay like light or radio waves. It would retain its energy over distance, cutting through armor, concrete, and steel as easily as sunlight through glass. And it could be deployed from the safety of a nation's own borders. No need for armies, no need for occupation, just a line of defense that no invader could cross. Tesla claimed the weapon would make war impossible, not by mutual destruction, but by making attack futile. If every country had this device, he said, no one would dare fire the first shot. In 1934, he published a brief description in a letter to the New York Times. He said he had already designed the system, that it required no power plants or complex logistics, that it could be built using his patented vacuum tubes, his unique electrical circuits, and his unmatched understanding of resonance and directed energy. But no one took him seriously. At the time, Tesla was nearing 80. He lived in room 3,327 of the New Yorker Hotel, alone and without income. His earlier contributions to science were already being credited to others. His later work considered fringe, even delusional. The world had come to see him not as a genius, but as a relic. A man who once dreamed of lighting the world and now muttered about invisible beams and cosmic rays. Still, he pursued the project. He met with diplomats, military officials, even J. Edgar Hoover. He offered his design as a defensive tool, not to conquer, but to protect. There were reports that the Soviet Union expressed interest, and rumors that Tesla had begun negotiations to share the plans. But before anything could be finalized, Tesla died in 1943, alone, uncelebrated. What followed was one of the strangest episodes in scientific history. Within hours of his death, the US government seized Tesla's belongings. Not just personal effects, but trunks full of notebooks, diagrams, lab journals, many written in his own cryptic shorthand. Officials claimed they were acting under the Alien Property Custodian Office, though Tesla had been a US citizen for decades. What they were really looking for was clear: the death ray. Reports later revealed that the Office of Naval Intelligence and the FBI combed through Tesla's papers, looking for anything of military value. Physicists were brought in to assess the documents. One of them was Dr. John G. Trump, yes, the uncle of future President Donald Trump, who later claimed that nothing in Tesla's notes represented a viable weapon. And yet, the documents were never fully released. Many of Tesla's notebooks remain classified. Others simply vanished. Some of his personal items were eventually handed over to a museum in Belgrade. But the crucial papers, the ones that might contain the details of his final invention, were never seen again. So what happened? Did the death ray exist? Or was it the final vision of a mind that had flown too far from Earth? Those who believe point to Tesla's history. This was not a man who made wild claims without backing them up. He had revolutionized electricity, built the first wireless communication devices, discovered resonance effects no one else could explain. When he spoke of energy and force, it was not from fantasy, but from deep, hard-won understanding. His vacuum tubes had no equal. His ability to shape high-voltage currents without arcing or heat was unmatched. The idea that he could have stumbled upon a new form of directed energy is not beyond belief. It's entirely possible. And yet the silence that followed his death has only deepened the mystery. During World War II, the US and other powers made rapid advancements in radar, microwave weaponry, and even particle acceleration. Projects with goals uncannily similar to Tesla's theories. Some of those advancements remain classified to this day. Perhaps his ideas were too far ahead. Perhaps they worked and were absorbed into military programs behind closed doors. Or perhaps they were simply lost, scribbled on papers no one understood, filed away in a box marked impossible, and left to gather dust. But imagine for a moment that the beam was real, that somewhere in the silence of Tesla's final years, he really did design a machine that could alter the course of warfare, of civilization itself. A machine that made war obsolete. A machine that no one dared to use. As you drift deeper, picture the machine. Elegant, quiet, resting in a forgotten lab. No explosions, no recoil, just a switch, a soft hum, and a beam. Invisible, instantaneous, unstoppable. A machine that worked not through fire, but through force, pure, focused, and absolute. Not all weapons make noise. Some just erase their targets, and some, when their creators vanish, go with them, into silence, into rumor, into history. The Chronovisor. Time for most of us is a river we can only sail in one direction. We drift forward, moment by moment, with only memory to look back and only hope to see ahead. But what if someone, somewhere, had found a way to break that rule? Not with a machine that moves bodies through time, like in stories of science fiction, but with something far stranger, a device that could see through time, to observe the past as if it were happening now, a kind of cosmic television. And what if that device wasn't locked in a government vault or a corporate lab, but hidden beneath the Vatican, guarded not by scientists, but by priests? This is the legend of the Chronovisor, a machine said to capture echoes of history itself. The first whispers of this story came not from tabloids, but from a man of faith. In 2002, Father François Brun, a respected French theologian, published a book titled The Vatican's New Mystery, in which he recounted astonishing conversations with a fellow priest, Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and scientist. According to Ernetti, he had been part of a secret project in the 1950s to build a device that could see the past. Ernetti claimed that the Chronovisor was real, that it had been constructed with the help of several prominent scientists, including Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and Werner von Braun, the German engineer who helped develop both Nazi rocketry and NASA's space program. Together, they had built a machine that could detect and reconstruct residual electromagnetic waves. The idea being that every moment in time leaves behind a kind of imprint, a faint but eternal signature, floating in the fabric of the universe. The Chronovisor, Ernetti explained, was a complex arrangement of antennae, cathode ray screens, and exotic metals designed to tune into these residual signals. Not just images, but sounds. A full playback of moments long vanished. Voices, faces, actions, all flickering back into view like a live broadcast from history itself. He claimed the device could view scenes from ancient Rome, from medieval Europe, even from biblical times. He said he had witnessed speeches by Napoleon, watched a lost tragedy by Sophocles, and, most shockingly, observed the crucifixion of Christ. According to Ernetti, he and his team had seen, with their own eyes, a moment that had existed for millennia only in scripture and belief. They had heard the crowd, seen the sky darken, watched it unfold as if they were there. For a moment, the boundary between faith and physics dissolved. But then, almost as suddenly as it began, the project was shut down. Ernetti claimed the Vatican had deemed the Chronovisor too dangerous. The potential misuse, by governments, by militaries, by anyone seeking to spy on the unchangeable past, was simply too great. The machine, he said, was dismantled, the parts hidden, the blueprints locked away. Only a few had seen it, fewer still spoke of it, and for decades Ernetti himself remained silent. It wasn't until the later years of his life that he began to share the story. Some dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. Others, including Father Brun, took it seriously. There was even a photograph, grainy and indistinct, supposedly taken from the Chronovisor, showing the anguished face of Christ on the cross. The image was widely circulated, then widely discredited. Skeptics pointed out its resemblance to a common statue. Others noted inconsistencies in Ernetti's accounts. And yet, the core of the story refused to fade. What makes the Chronovisor legend so compelling isn't just the idea of time travel, it's the way it was supposedly done. Not through breaking the laws of physics, but by listening to the remnants of time itself. Modern physics has begun to explore similar questions. Are events truly gone when they pass? Or do they leave behind an informational residue, faint but recoverable? Quantum theory suggests that time and space are far more flexible than we once believed. Some researchers speak of the holographic principle, the idea that the entire universe may be a kind of projection, where every point contains echoes of every other point. In that kind of reality, a machine like the Chronovisor doesn't seem so impossible, just undiscovered. And then there's the Vatican. Officially, the Church denies that such a machine ever existed. There are no records, no acknowledgments, no confirmations, but the Vatican is also one of the most secretive institutions on Earth. It holds archives that stretch back centuries. Documents, artifacts, knowledge that has never been shown to the public. If something like the Chronovisor did exist, it would be the kind of invention that might be hidden, not heralded. Silenced, not celebrated. Why? Because seeing the past changes everything. If we could truly witness history, not through books but through direct observation, our entire understanding of truth would shift. Wars could be re-examined, faith could be confirmed or shattered, myths could be proven or undone. There would be no more guessing, no more interpretation, only a raw, undeniable reality. That kind of power is terrifying. As you rest, imagine such a device sitting in a cold chamber beneath stone arches. Dust gathers on its switches. Screens flicker with half-formed images. A hum pulses from deep within its coils. Somewhere in that silence, the past is still playing, like a movie reel without an audience. Not all inventions move us forward. Some simply let us look back, with perfect clarity and impossible consequence. Perhaps the Chronovisor never existed, or perhaps it worked exactly as they said, and that's why it had to disappear. Because once you can see the truth, you can never close your eyes again. The water-powered car. It was a warm spring day in 1998 when Stanley Meyer, an inventor from Ohio, walked into a restaurant to have lunch with two potential investors. He drank cranberry juice, smiled politely, and then, according to witnesses, clutched his throat, stumbled out into the parking lot, and collapsed. His last words, were spoken with urgency and fear, were, "They poisoned me." Moments later, he was dead. To most, it was a tragic but unremarkable death. The coroner listed it as a cerebral aneurysm, but to those who knew what Meyer had claimed to build, it felt like the final chapter in a much larger, darker story. Because Stanley Meyer wasn't just an inventor, he was the man who said he had cracked one of the greatest technological mysteries of all time: how to run a car on water. Not a hybrid, not a car that needed just a little gasoline to get going. Meyer claimed that with his patented invention, ordinary tap water could be split into hydrogen and oxygen on demand, and that this gas could power an internal combustion engine directly, completely replacing fossil fuels. He called it the water fuel cell, and according to him, it could drive a car across the United States on just 22 gallons of water. At first glance, it sounded impossible, a direct challenge to the laws of thermodynamics. Conventional electrolysis, after all, consumes more energy than it produces. But Meyer said his process was different. He had developed a method using resonant frequencies, pulsing high-voltage signals through water at specific intervals to crack it apart with minimal energy input. It wasn't brute force electrolysis. It was harmonic separation. The water, he claimed, was not just a resource. It was a fuel. His invention was more than theory. He built a working prototype, a modified dune buggy, which he drove around Ohio, inviting reporters and engineers to witness the vehicle running solely on water. Local news segments aired footage of the strange machine chugging along. His car had no fuel tank, only a container of water and his signature fuel cell, which turned H2O into what he called hydroxy gas, powering the engine with clean combustion and leaving nothing but water vapor behind. The implications were staggering. No more gasoline, no more oil wars, no more emissions, pipelines, or pollution. Just a world powered by the simplest and most abundant liquid on Earth. Naturally, the skepticism came quickly. Scientists demanded data. Institutions asked for replication. Meyer declined to share his schematics in full, citing the need to protect his patents and avoid corporate sabotage. He was wary. Some said paranoid, but not without reason. Because interest in his invention didn't come only from environmentalists. It came from oil companies, military contractors, foreign governments. According to Meyer, representatives from the Middle East offered him $1 billion to shelve his invention permanently. He refused. Then came the lawsuits. In 1996, an Ohio court ruled against Meyer in a case brought by two investors who claimed his invention was a fraud. Expert witnesses argued that his water fuel cell was nothing more than standard electrolysis repackaged. The court agreed, ordering him to repay the investors. Meyer protested. He said the tests were flawed, that his technology had been misunderstood or intentionally sabotaged. 2 years later, he was dead. His death was sudden, unexplained, and to those who believed in his work, suspicious. No thorough investigation was ever opened. His lab was reportedly ransacked shortly after his passing. Equipment vanished. Documents went missing. His patents, many already filed, became dormant, and the world, ever so briefly intrigued by the promise of water-powered travel, moved on. But the idea didn't die with him. In the years since, countless inventors around the world have tried to recreate Meyer's device. Some claim success. Others run into the same wall: a lack of funding, a lack of institutional support, or a sudden loss of interest from potential investors once large energy players become aware. The phrase water-powered car now sits in that peculiar place between genius and conspiracy. Too hopeful to dismiss, too disruptive to embrace, modern science continues to investigate hydrogen fuel. Electrolysis, fuel cells, and water-splitting technologies are now common in clean energy research, but none operate the way Meyer described. Off the grid, in real time, inside a moving vehicle, without external power. That remains elusive, or perhaps forbidden. Imagine for a moment the world Meyer envisioned: cities with no exhaust, highways without gas stations, engines powered not by burning ancient fossils, but by unlocking the silent energy within water molecules. A world where a single glass of water held the potential to move mountains, or at least move us past the need for oil. As you drift deeper into quiet thought, picture the dune buggy rolling down an empty road. No smell of gasoline, no heat of combustion, just a soft whir, a bubbling tank, and the cool whisper of vapor rising behind. It wasn't just a machine, it was a message that energy might not be scarce, that the power we seek might already be all around us, or within us. But the louder that message became, the quieter the world grew in response. Because not all inventions are welcomed. Some arrive too soon, and some, like a drop in still water, vanish before the ripples are ever seen. The Searl effect generator. There are moments in history where an idea flickers into existence, strange, glowing, and full of promise, only to be snuffed out before it can catch fire. Not because it failed, but because it didn't, because it worked too well. In the case of John Searl, that idea was a machine, a spinning, humming device that he said could generate limitless energy and levitate on its own. without fuel, wires, or combustion. A device that defied gravity and thermodynamics. A machine so simple in form and so profound in consequence that if real, it could rewrite the rules of physics and civilization itself. He called it the Searl effect generator, or SEG. Searl wasn't a university-trained scientist. He was a British engineer, born in 1932, raised in poverty, and trained in electrical work. He said the idea for the SEG came to him not through traditional study, but through a vision. As a teenager, he began dreaming of mathematical symbols and mechanical shapes, repeated again and again each night, like messages carved into his subconscious. He believed they were instructions, a blueprint for something that didn't yet exist in the physical world. And so, he built it. The first SEG was simple in appearance, a set of concentric metal rings with smaller magnetic rollers placed along the outer rim. But when powered correctly, or perhaps when it powered itself, the rollers began to spin around the ring without touching it, suspended in motion by a magnetic force. As they accelerated, something strange occurred. The temperature in the room dropped. A faint glow appeared around the machine. And then, incredibly, it lifted off the ground. Searl claimed that the machine produced both anti-gravity and clean energy at the same time. It didn't consume fuel. It didn't wear down. It tapped into what he called the ambient energy of space, a kind of field or force that existed all around us, waiting to be harnessed. The faster the rollers moved, the more energy it produced, and the lighter the entire system became. Eventually, it hovered. In some tests, it reportedly flew out of control, breaking through ceilings, vanishing into the sky, never to be recovered. Of course, this was the 1950s and 60s. No smartphones, no viral videos. Just word of mouth, a few fuzzy photographs, and a man with an unbelievable story. But that story wouldn't go away. Searl continued building prototypes, claiming success again and again. He said the device could power a home indefinitely, that it had no emissions, no heat waste, and no moving parts in contact, meaning no friction, no decay. He said the SEG had no limit. If scaled properly, it could power entire cities or lift manned crafts into the sky without fuel. He called his creations levity discs and said he flew them in the English countryside. He dreamed of a future where these crafts could carry people, cargo, even serve as interstellar vehicles, riding on the magnetic fabric of space itself. The device, he insisted, was scalable and entirely real. But with each demonstration came more disbelief. Scientists dismissed his work as pseudoscience. Funding evaporated. His equipment was destroyed in a house fire. His workshop was vandalized. He was arrested multiple times, not for fraud, but for supposedly operating without permits or causing blackouts during unauthorized energy experiments. Some claim his home was raided, his notes taken. Others say he simply became a threat to a system that wasn't ready for a world beyond fossil fuels and gravity-bound machines. And yet, he kept going. Decades later, Searl moved to the United States and formed the Searl Aerospace Group, trying once again to bring the SEG to life. Crowdfunding campaigns, interviews, and conference presentations followed. Videos appeared online, showing small-scale demonstrations of the rollers spinning, levitating, resisting magnetic interference. Enough to keep the legend alive, but never enough to satisfy mainstream science. To this day, no major institution has confirmed or replicated Searl's results. No peer-reviewed study has endorsed the SEG, but that hasn't stopped thousands around the world from trying to rebuild it. Hobbyists, rogue engineers, and independent labs continue to experiment with similar designs. Magnetic propulsion, frictionless bearings, toroidal motion, each claims to come close. None claim to succeed fully. And yet the dream persists. Because the idea of a machine that produces infinite, clean energy without fuel, that lifts itself into the sky with no wings, no engines, no heat, is simply too beautiful to abandon. Modern physics is beginning to catch up to ideas once dismissed. Quantum vacuum energy, magnetic flux fields, gravitational wave manipulation, concepts that sound eerily close to what Searl described decades ago. Perhaps he was wrong in the details, but right in the direction. Perhaps the SEG didn't defy physics. Perhaps it showed us we don't yet know all the laws. As you slip further into calm, picture it. A silver disk, humming softly, suspended in the air. No noise, no emissions, just a glow, blue-white like starlight, flickering at its edges. It does not fall, it does not burn. It floats, serene and indifferent to gravity. Not because it cheats the universe, but because it understands it in a way we don't yet. Some inventions die in obscurity, others are buried on purpose, and some, like the SEG, hover just beyond our reach, like a whisper from a future we almost had. Ending. And now, as we reach the end of this quiet journey through forgotten inventions and vanishing machines, perhaps you feel it too, that sense of wonder, that delicate unease, a question lingering just at the edge of sleep. What else have we lost? And what truths might still be hidden in plain sight? If this story stirred something in you, even a flicker of curiosity, a passing thought, a quiet what if, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that this strange corner of the internet is worth visiting again. If you've heard of other forbidden inventions, ones we didn't mention, or if you have thoughts, theories, or even dreams of your own, share them in the comments. I always read them, and they often become the spark for future episodes. Subscribe if you'd like to keep drifting through stories like this one, where science, mystery, and sleep meet under the same quiet sky. And if someone you know might need a gentle escape tonight, share this video with them. You never know which mind it might touch.